My name is Paul, and if you haven't seen any of my videos, I make a lot of videos about perception and esoteric mysteries and so on. And I've been a student of meditation and esoteric teachings for most of my adult life, since about 1972. And I learned a practice of meditation back then, and again, it was all self-knowledge is what our journey here in this life. So my journey started when I was 20, and I learned how to practice a certain meditation that I've spoken about in other videos. And along the way, my own journey of self-discovery has led me to some very fascinating discoveries and findings and so on that I share with people. And I don't have a particular esoteric psychology degree, and I know there's a lot of very profound and intelligent people who are practicing things like esoteric Jungian psychology and what's called depth psychology and so on. But I talk a little bit differently. I take it to a little bit different degree here, and I think if you listen and hear some of my other videos, you'll find the information very, very interesting and can incorporate it into some of your other discoveries and personal knowledge that you have. So in the previous videos, I really mentioned about the esoteric teachings essentially were given to human beings, and we've all heard of them probably. They come from Egypt, they come from India, they come from the Celtic land, they come from the Native Americans, they come from South America and Peru and that area of the world. All around the world there were teachings regarding our own awareness, essentially, basically self-knowledge. That's what we're supposed to be here for. So the esoteric teachings say that basically this big thing that we're in here, this universe, you might say, there's an embedded consciousness, you might say, and that embedded consciousness has a link. We have a link through our conscious mind, or we can establish a link through our conscious mind in this particular body, this vehicle that we have, this beautiful vehicle. The esoteric teachings say that through practice of meditation and having some basic understandings in our life about certain things that our approach to life, we have an inward journey in our life as well as an external journey, and that's the whole point, to have a deep, powerful experience of our own existence. And I often use this example of a rider on a horse. Basically, we go through our lives and we sort of get the feeling sometimes that we're just like this horse and someone's always kicking us, or else we're on a horse, or a rogue horse, and the horse just has a mind of its own, and we're always like trying to manage it and so on. And the rider on the horse is our own soul, our own spirit being, our own consciousness. And again, that thread of consciousness goes down. The reason we have an ability to even say I am is because of the breath. And the breath of God, you might say, the breathing of the universe, the cosmic momentum, the spirit of the movement of the spirit, we're part of that. And we're like the rider on the horse, and we have some features that we can manage, our bodies, our different aspects of our body and psyche and so on. And I go into some of that in this and other videos. But I want to give an example here for a moment. Supposing you were the captain of a huge ocean-going tanker or something, and cargo ship. And you know how big those things are. They're huge. Some of them are hundreds of yards long. They're just immense weight. But up in the tower somewhere, there's a little captain's area, and they have like a little lookout there, a bridge you might say, and people are sitting there, and they have these little controls. Compared to the size of the ship, they have a lot of buttons and things and gauges and stuff, and then they have like a big wheel. And the analogy is that our being is like that little person up there in the bridge, and the captain. We're in command, you might say, of a rather large existence. There's a lot of features to this existence, this life that we have, and we have some controls, we have some mechanisms, and sometimes we don't know which buttons to push or which things to move, but we have an array of features in our existence such as our body. We have the obvious things, our hands, our senses, our feet, and the different aspects of our body and our voice and so on. But it even goes deeper than that, and that's what depth psychology is about. That's what esoteric teachings are about. And there's a whole lot of as above, so below, as within, so outside. There's a linkage, like I said, from all the way from top to bottom of this consciousness. There's one being in this universe. Basically, there's one existence, and you can argue with it, but frankly, we're just here, a piece of dust for a little while, and to argue with this big universe, we only have a short time to figure this out here. So the sages, we benefit from the teachings of ages, and we say, look, the fortunate thing is that it's very easy for us to know who we are. That's the amazing thing. It's overlooked. It's very, very overlooked, and I won't get into that here right now, but it's essentially, you can sometimes just look in a mirror and you look at yourself, and just at some point it just sort of becomes obvious that this being that we have is just amazing and has all these features, and we can make our senses better, we can make our body better, we can feel bliss and joy, we can do all kinds of amazing things with this body, as we know. So obviously this vehicle that we have has a whole lot of potential, and every single human being is the same in that regard. We have this vehicle. Now, among the features that are often discussed in esoteric psychology are things like, well, we have the emotional body and the mental body and the etheric body and the astral body and the bliss body and the causal body and so on. Now, it gets really complicated, and to give you a little idea here, I read this book here, and there's a second volume of it. I read it a long time ago, and I still have notes in it, but Esoteric Psychology Volume 1, and this really gets into it if you really have the interest. It'll be kind of mind-blowing in a way, and you'll have to go through it a lot and keep reading back. Another book here is The Light of the Soul. Now this was, I've talked about this before. Basically it's Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and talks a lot about the equipment, and this is there's many translations and commentaries on it, but basically the commentary has to do with elucidating through some dialogue the various features. And if you read these books, you see some of these yogis, like they refined their body to such a degree, and of course we don't necessarily do that in the modern world, but they refine their bodies to such a degree that extremely, extremely sensitive perceptions and inner sounds and inner bliss. And if you do some very serious discipline in your life, and when I was young I used to do that. I was a strict vegetarian for a number of years, and I practiced a lot of meditation and really felt a lot of really, kind of ecstatic kind of bliss in my body. And certainly meditation sometimes was sometimes you didn't even want to stop. But the point I'm trying to make is that these concepts that we have about the astral body and the emotional body and so on, I like to think of it a little differently instead of using the phrase body. Because when I used to read these books like everybody reads about the astral body and your mental body, and trying to figure out what are you talking about, Now, from what I understand, what they call the etheric body, which is an energy matrix that is underlying every physical thing, such as every living thing has a matrix underlying. It's called the energy matrix, you might say. And that's what taps into what's called the etheric body. Now, what I understand from the teachings that I read was the etheric body is basically a pattern duplicate of the physical body. In other words, it retains the memory, and it is the underlying support of the physical body. And there's some kind of a chemistry and the DNA's involved and all that stuff, but in a sense, basically we're talking about a finer grade of matter that, like when you cut yourself, it'll heal because there's an energetic pattern that's built into your system that starts to heal itself right away because it has that memory, and it has an inborn faculty that immediately starts to repair. See, now the emotional body and the astral body, in my understanding, are basically, we're talking about the use of the will. And we know that when we are quiet, we may not be visually active, or we may even be closing our ears or something, but there's a part of our being, a collective part of our being, that we can feel sort of emotions, whatever there's almost like an energy. So the combined will, in esoteric teachings, the emotional body in the astral body is connected with water. So we have a large water component of our body, obviously, and a lot of minerals and so on are dissolved in it. So our emotions, when we get afraid or we get active emotionally in a positive way, there's the water in our bodies involved, the nerves, the transmission, the fluids, there's or basically like a soup here, you might say. But beyond that, there's the will. Remember, there's a thread of our consciousness that goes all the way through. We can feel it in our physical body, and then there are people who they have an amputation, but they can still feel the etheric part of their body, and they swear that leg is still there or something, but they're feeling what they call the etheric aspect of it, the energy framework that has a memory. And then we're talking about the emotional. The emotional doesn't have, it's amorphous, you might say. So there's an energy. And there's heat in our body too. People talk about fire and water. They get hot. So when we get in our anger mode, or even in emotional mode, or it may not be anger, but we're emotionally involved with something. Sometimes we just literally heat up. Now the mental body is another issue. So it's kind of like, how do you analyze the mental body with your mind? It's kind of like trying to catch your elbow with your hand. I mean, you're using the tool that you're trying to analyze the tool with. So the way to analyze the mental body, sometimes our mind can get a hold of our emotions and kind of like, okay, hold on your horses there, buddy, or whatever. But when what controls our mind, you see? So the active mental component of ours is associated with electricity and air, as opposed to the water emotional part. Electricity and air and the signs of the zodiac related to that. There's a lot of symbolism, as people get into in some other videos that I've seen. But basically, there's a inner psychology, and there's components. So there's the emotional component, then there's the mental component, and the mental component has to be, that's where the problem comes. Well, first of all, in the spiritual development, we so-called spiritual, but in our personal growth and everything, try to get a little handle on our emotions to some degree, and in a good way too. We can use them very positively. We can harness that emotional energy and direct it to somebody in a really, really positive way, as well as sometimes the other way. But the mental aspect is a little more of a challenge, because how do you have to let the mind settle. For example, again, that component of our being that is beyond the mind is what we get initiated into when maybe a teacher shows it to us, or maybe you may have an out-of-body experience, or you have some kind of a revelation of some kind, and you start to feel, because this is all an inborn knowledge. We have this all in us, and sometimes it just spontaneously awakes. But lack of that, there are people out there who teach this. Now, and give it a practical experience. See, a real teacher is going to really not just say a bunch of words, but kind of activate through a transmission to activate and help us understand these really simple things. And it's kind of like, what is that thing in us that observes? Is there something that can observe the mind? Now, a lot of people, when they sit and meditate the first time, they realize that there's something watching their mind, because you keep seeing all these thoughts go by. Now, I heard one guru explain it to me like, well, if you sit by the river and you see a bunch of fish jumping, and you can get into a whole think in your mind about, I wonder why their fish are jumping, and maybe something's trying to catch them, and maybe they're just having fun, and what kind of fish are they, and where are they going, and why are they in this river? So all these kind of thoughts come in because there's something witnessing your thoughts. And this guru was saying, well, just don't even try to figure out what the fish are doing. In other words, just the thoughts come and go, let them do what their thing is, but there's another part of us, which is the neutral observer, which I've described in many videos, of that non-dual, non-local, subtle awareness that has no opinion on anything. It observes. It is a witness, and ultimately the yogis say basically that witness, there's a oneness between what you perceive and what you are, in a sense, because we're all, I mean, it's at that level the consciousness gets into the subtler and subtler things. Now, we always think about dimensions, and I thought about that a lot. There's mathematical dimensions. We know what, the 3 dimensions of space or whatever, and then what's a dimension? Now, my understanding, if we think about like the whole universe is basically just unending frequencies of all different kinds, and they have ratios and so on and proportions. But there's as above, so below. So as in a musical scale, you have, from A, B, C up to F or whatever, and then or G, and then repeats, and then you have the different. You have like the other notes, the flat and the sharp notes in there, and that's it. That's the scale. But then it's like goes all the way up and all the way up. Now, let's say try to imagine a scale that's first of all much bigger. Now, if we take the esoteric teachings that the physical sounds that we can hear and the ones that are harmonious to us and to our body are also just a tiny, tiny fraction that links us into that vibration, links us into the infinite vibration. See, this is where there's a great mystery here, and I can get into some of that. But as far as the invocation, that's why we make sounds, that's why we make prayers, because our consciousness, God's not far away. God doesn't live up there somewhere. God, just, you can't look around and find God this way. See, you have to feel that experience of within you that is breathing you and making your cells work, and then from that neutral point of view, that's where you can observe your mind, so-called mental body. Now, the way I think about mental body is there's an accumulation of our thought patterns, that habits and so on in our life. And the yogis say that it really, are we born with a DNA and it carries the memory sometimes of other existences and lives and certain basically patterns. Now, the yogis say that you can get into a deep meditation and you can start accessing some of the memory in your body that has to do with previous existence or the cosmos or, divine inspiration or learning or whatever. And you can do that by settling your mind, because when all those thoughts, all those fish stop jumping, I mean, if you sit there long enough, the evening comes and now the fish just go back into their little places or whatever, or the birds stop chirping. But when you sit in meditation long enough, at some point that mental energy that is normally just chattering, and it it's like a mouse everywhere. It's always constantly moving, and when we can harness that, just like you can harness the emotional energy and focus your emotional energy by using the deeper psyche of your being, that rider on the horse, the captain of the ship, that it's got this huge ship in front of you. You can do this whole. But you have these little controls in here. If you just learn these little things that you do here, it sends the message and you're controlling this big ship. So our being is, we learn, I learn on a little airplane, and I'm probably never going to fly a big airplane, but at least I know how to fly a little airplane. So in a manner of speaking here, maybe we're not these great yogis and sages or whatever, but we have basically our own little ship here that we're monitoring and managing, and there's a lot of different features of this thing that we can explore and use. And even a small boat, with the right equipment, you can get all kinds of places if you want to. I wouldn't go out in the deep ocean until you get a little bit bigger ship, but the point is that the esoteric psychology is about harnessing those deeper aspects of our being, and they have a symbolic representation outside. That's why symbols and imagery is so important, because in our atoms, in our body, in the chemistry of our body, in the molecules of our body, there are shapes and there's frequencies and so on, and as above, so below, as without, so within, so that when we see a symbol, it can resonate something complex and complicated in our own being, because again, there's a thread of consciousness all the way through the subconscious, all the way to the subatomic. If you want to go that route and go live in a cave, you know, the yogis say that if you really want to do this with this life, you can have some pretty amazing experiences, and you just be in bliss all your whole life. But there's a lot of work to do out here, so, you know, most of the yogis on the planet right now are not in their caves. They're out here. There's millions of them. But I want to introduce this book here, a book of symbols. You see, now this book, really, really fat book. I knew some people who were involved in creating this book, just on a little tiny bit. But, I mean, there's so many symbols, so many things, and that's why dreams have such incredible power, because sometimes you can have a dream and you last for their whole life. You go, man, I still remember that dream, and what was it all about? Because, again, the thread of our consciousness is already there in the infinite. It's just a matter of, okay, let's say you have some new property, and, you know, there is a little bit of a clearing there, but that's about it, you know, and I've seen properties like that. I'm a realtor. So our life, when we're young, we have that little clearing. We know a little bit about this life, and we know a little bit about how to operate our vehicle and so on. So as we live there, we build a stronger and stronger access through the process of meditation, and there are actually techniques. Now again, the knowledge of the soul is a science. It's been set down in some of the greatest and most popular books of all time, thousands of years. Literally, there's a place in India where they have a record of 5,000 years of this particular Patanjali teaching. 5,000 years of esoteric teaching about the mind and the consciousness. And because a science has a practical result. If you practice something, if you refine your body, you're going to have result. If you focus your mind, you're going to have result. If you use sound and chanting and om and this and that, you're going to have result. There's all these different techniques that if you use them, the inner journey is extremely interesting and goes on and on and on and on. And it's just like a map of the world. I mean, you know, once you got the right vehicle, you can go anywhere you want. So there's places I haven't been yet. And there's places I'd like to go back to. But esoteric, this life is a journey psychologically. It's a journey in consciousness. I mean, the word psychology sometimes, unfortunately, the study of the psyche, you mention sometimes psychology, somebody, and sometimes their mind just behaviorism, my dog, we're just a bunch of rabbits are here and all that. But the psyche is a word that has an amorphous meaning. It's really hard to define, but basically that area of our being, which is maybe unexplored and at the present unconscious, but can become conscious, through a process of journey and techniques and using imagery and using symbols and so on, that awaken our infinite understanding. We have an infinite goal. I mean, the doors go wider and wider and wider as we go inward. It's like you go inward like a funnel, okay? There's a narrow, you get to the inward, the narrow door, you might say, and then it starts expanding, okay? So the so-called world that we narrow down, we have our career, we have our little whatever, we narrow ourselves down. But if you were to narrow yourself down like some of these yogis do, and they just say, well, this is where I'm going, and I'm going to go right down that vortex, and I'm going to come out the other side, and it's going to be like expansion into the infinite. So the beauty of the self-knowledge that there's just endless beings and endless growth, and it doesn't matter where you are on the scale. In other words, if you play this like in a musical scale, you can play a beautiful tune on the low end, or you can play it on the high end. All of it is beautiful, and from the point of view of God or whatever, there's no judgment. We're just like all on this continuum of growth and understanding, and by having helpful teachings that come from us in the old and esoteric psychology and working with our dreams and symbolism and so on, and sitting quietly and just being our own being without a label on it, when we have a nature inside that is a unity. That is our true nature. In fact, that is what we really are. Just like we can look at ourselves in a mirror and you say, I have a hand, I have an eye, I have a hair, I got a shirt on, I got this and that. I have all these features, but when I close all my eyes, and if I'm naked or whatever, even so, there's still something doing that. I am. The Om, the Amen, the name that can't be spoken, the breathing of the cosmos. There's a silent presence within us that helps stabilize our mind. Because how do you stabilize your mind? Well, there's an old saying, like a bird gets tired after a while. The Upanishads say, birds gets tired, finally it has to come down and it lands on a tree or its nest, and that's what it does. It gets tired. The mind is kind of like when you walk your dog. They walk the dog, and the dog, like, let him run for a long time and get him all tired, and then he says, okay, now I'm going to go home now. So the mind, from the point of view of the neutral possession, the neutral perception that we have within us, the mind and the mental activity is just, you can pick it up or put it down. Just like you can pick up an object. You decide, well, I'm going to use for example, I'm going to use my mind to do some calculations or do my real estate business or something. And then I'm going to sit for a while and have a period where there's no thinking. Now, when people say no thinking, that's another thing that people think that their thoughts are themselves. But if you start to practice meditation, you'll quickly find out that those thoughts go rambling on, and sometimes the thoughts that come in your mind is, where did that come from? I don't know where it came from, but see, you can be objective about your thoughts to some degree, because there's an essence of you that's far beyond that, like I said, the captain of that big, huge ship, imagine it sits up in that control room in the bridge and says, okay, I just move this little thing just a little bit this way, I'm going to steer 5 degrees to the east, or maybe I'm going to reduce the throttle just a little bit, just like when I'm flying my plane, there's things I do, and some of them are subtle, and some of them are big, So it's important for us to feel like the rider on the horse, that we have some higher elevation point of view, a perception of our total existence, not just our body. An athlete will get really great handle on their body, but to get some kind of a feeling and a focus in our emotions, and some kind of focus in our mental activity. And then they say that when you get your mind to such a point where it becomes almost like that tool, like a flashlight, like a laser beam. So the yogi wants to see something, he wants to perceive something, an alignment can be made in the entire perception organ. This whole body, the emotions, everything, the mind, all the senses that we have are one perceiving organism and being. in a manner of speaking, try to think, okay, let's say you're in an ocean and you can feel all the ocean around you. You can feel it on your skin and you're kind of immersed in it, but you don't know the whole ocean. You don't know what's going on the other side of the ocean, but you still have a really good sense of, yeah, that's the ocean. It's the same way with meditation, because you can meditate and you feel like, okay, that's a big universe. That's a big, big beingness, but I feel a oneness with it because it's a part of me. And the more we fragment ourselves and our own ideas and have different, we can easily get fragmented in life. It happens, and it's the society that we live in just tends to do that, and relationships and business and work pressures and children and all that. You can get fragmented, but just like a magnet, the idea is like a sharpening knife. Okay, well, yeah, the knife gets dull when you use it. It gets like little chips or something, but then you just got the right tool, like meditation, saying, now I'm going to make that surface good again. I'm going to harmonize myself. I'm going to get to a place of integration. That's alignment, and integration has a lot to do with our psychology, because if we, ideally as human beings, we want a great alignment from the back of the head. There's a chakra there. There's a plate in the top of the head. The body has a tremendous number of little vortexes, but there are places that we all know about with the back of the head. If you sometimes want to harmonize yourself, I can do some other techniques in another video, but if your hands got a good energy in them, you can place them just like Reiki. The back of the head here, and the throat has an energy center, and the heart has energy. When all these things are aligned, you feel absolutely incredible. That's why exercise is good, and I don't do enough, but meditation, exercise, moving the body harmonically, all that again is integration, and having a psychological vehicle, you might say, and it's very hard to maintain. This is the challenge of human life. We've gone through so much. Sometimes people have trauma when they're little, or life is really hard, their job or whatever, and their health or something. So these kinds of things affect us, but it's just a constant thing of maintaining ourselves and getting ourselves back together. That's what I find for meditation. Just, if I feel like I need to get myself organized a little bit, all it takes is just to sit and meditate for a while. And if I meditate a long time, it feels really good. I tell people, if I don't feel good and I practice, I feel it always works. I feel better. And if I feel good and I practice, I feel incredible. So thanks for listening. I'm going to talk a little more about this, but again, the perception. What is the nature of our being? Who are we? What are we doing here? And I see the video's gone on now for a little bit longer than I expected. So thanks again for watching. Please like and share. And if you find something useful of this, I just offer this information. Use it, apply it, think about it. If it means anything, if it's useful to you, then like and share. So thanks again.